Welcome back to Tumor Board with Hilario and Anish. I'm your co-host Anish.
And this is Hilario.
Today, we're going to follow up our last episode with a hospitalist and personal finance guru and talk about budgeting. So if you haven't listened to our last episode, I highly recommend you do. We just talk about general principles of personal finance and where to start. But today, we want to follow that up by doing a deep dive in how Hilario and I approach our finances to give practical tips you can use. So to start off, Hilario, when did you start to really pay attention to your finances and budget?
Well, it's probably like third year of medical school. I was thinking about getting engaged to my then girlfriend. And obviously, if you're going to get engaged to someone, then you better have your stuff together in terms of money. So that's when I really started paying attention to how much debt I actually had from student loans, and also how much I was getting from family and support from other places. So that's when I really kind of did the whole, let me put all my assets and liabilities on a paper, right? And it was not pretty.
Mhm.
But then that kind of gave me a sense of what I needed to change and what I needed to do to actually be able to go ahead with getting engaged and also getting married. What about you?
Yeah, for me, it started in intern year when I finally started making an income. Originally I was putting some things aside just because of the influence of my parents, my roommate, a few of my friends, but I didn't really actively keep track exactly how much money I'm making and how much I'm spending. I just kind of spent more freely, kind of went out to eat a lot, went out just to entertainment, money on vacations, etc. But then COVID happened. And when COVID happened, I wasn't seeing a lot of my friends. So I just used that time
Right.
and read about budgeting, investing. And then I got really into it because I knew at that point I'm moving to Philadelphia. I'm starting my actual residency where I have to
Right.
care, like really, really kind of work hard. And I wanted to make sure, and I was looking at potential places to live. So I was like, wow, I need to get this in high gear, figure out my finances and kind of how
hmm
to budget appropriately so I can live that life and save that money that I want to.
Yeah, I mean, that cracks. So reading about why people, budget usually has to do with certain things like whether they're making a big move, right? Whether career
Mhm.
wise or, if they're not thinking about retirement. Unfortunately, if people are already working for many years and now deciding to think about their budgets and their savings because of retirement, is usually not a good time to be doing that
Mhm.
because you kind of a little late in the game. But it's still better now than later kind of attitude that you have to use to approach this. Sometimes when people are thinking about, buying a house, right, they have to figure out whether they can afford the down payment and all that kind of stuff. So that's when people start thinking about budgeting, and then getting married and having kids. Usually some of the life events that make people sit back and take an account of all their, income and expenses and their assets and stuff like that. So I think that before we get into, the breakdown of our own budget, we need to do like a recap of the different types of budget that are out there.
Mhm.
You can start an issue.
Yeah, the first type is called the envelope method. So it's not an exciting method and it does take time, but basically it helps just curb your spending. And I
Right.
think historically it's really based on a time when people just had a lot of cash, didn't have credit card and there was no real digital banking. But basically,
Mhm.
let's say you start with $1,000 and you have 10 envelopes. You have entertainment, groceries, rent, etc. And you put in $100 in each envelope. And once you get to the end of the envelope, that's it. You can't spend any more than that. And if you
Mhm.
do want to, then you have to realize you're taking money out of another envelope to fill that one.
Hmm.
And you just can't
Right.
grow money. You can't make any more money. So that's really all you have. And then once it's
Right.
empty, you got to wait to the next paycheck to replenish that envelope.
Right. So that seems more like a very reactive to budgeting, where people who already have their finances out
Mhm.
of like, whack, were are trying to kind of, control it. So it seems like something that can be a very good start to budgeting, but then maybe as you get better at it, you can kind of refine it a little bit more. Would you say that?
Yeah, I would say that. I think after you do it a few months, you get a little more routine into what your habits are and how your spending usually is. It'll probably be easier to do.
You're right. Right. So the next one is probably a little bit more common than the envelope method, where you hear these financial advisors tell you that you need to put 50% of your income towards necessities, 30% of it to wants, the things that are not that necessary, and then 20% to a combination of savings and debt repayment. And then part of that 20% could also be deciding whether you want that is savings to just be purely cash savings, or whether you want to put that towards investing. So personally do some variation of this, and we'll get into that. The next one is the zero-based method. It is similar to the envelope method, but it is a little bit more proactive. It's not as reactive as the envelope method, where you are assigning a job for every dollar that you're already going to get. So, you set money each month for grocery bills, vacation, your debt, until you reach a zero balance. And this helps you make a more intentional spending plan. It is similar to envelope method, but you're not reacting to your expenses being out of control. You're just having this proactive to how much you spend on your day to day. What's the last one, Anish?
Yeah, the last one is called pay yourself first. So this is quote unquote a reverse budget. And basically, you contribute to your savings and investments first, essentially pay yourself, right? And then you allocate
Hmm.
the rest to pay bills and other necessities and other wants with whatever is left. So with
Hmm.
this method, you can decide how much is set aside for savings, debt repayment, than other expenses. Now, one way in like modern days to make that easier, for example, you might say, hey, I want to contribute $500 for every paycheck to my retirement account. So your employer will just kind of take it out and put in your retirement
Hmm.
account. And then that way you're paying yourself first and you don't even kind of see that money. But
Right.
I think,
Right.
this can be kind of difficult if you're a resident on a resident salary, especially if you have obligations like kids and things like that, where, yeah, you may want to, but if you only have X amount of money, it's tough to spend on the other things.
Kind of similar to what AC mentioned before. It's really like trying to get your budgeting muscle active, right? So
Mhm.
it is, at least in med school and in residency, is it's less so how much you can put towards you know, any of these strategies, and more being in practice and having that sense of like, saving and knowing where your money is going, so that if you needed to make any changes, you can actually easily do that. We can get into the actual breakdown of our budget. So, and each what method of budgeting do you use, and what kind of tools do you use to keep track of all of this?
Yeah, when I first started to kind of get into budgeting, I downloaded Mint, which is owned by Intuit. It's a pretty
Yeah.
popular
Yeah.
app. Yeah, and you link your credit cards or bank accounts, so everything's automated. So on one hand, things were really easy, right? Because it says exactly how much is coming out, coming in, what my spending is, kind of keeping it all together. But it's
Hmm.
also very reactive. So though I kind of use that pay yourself first a bit, where I did just kind of immediately just put money into my Roth IRA and whatnot, and then paid my loans. The rest of it is very reactive. So I wasn't able to really control spending in different categories like restaurants
Right.
and clothes or just other necessities. And I just felt like it just wasn't helping. It was a great tool to put everything together, but it wasn't really helpful for me personally to kind of budget and know and be actively engaged with my finances. But that is one that's a popular one. And that's what I started with. There are
Hmm.
other things like Kilario is going to go into his Excel sheet. And if you don't know how to use one or you don't have a template, you could find one online. I currently use something called You Need a Budget, also known as YNAB, YNAB. Yeah, I'm like a
Hmm.
super fan of YNAB. I think it's amazing. It can be cumbersome, and it's definitely not for everyone, but it's really awesome. So YNAB is kind of a combination of envelope method and zero based method. And what
Okay.
it is it's a platform. There's a mobile app, but there's also like a a, a website version, so you can use it on your desktop. And you can link your credit cards. You can automate it, which I used to do. And we can get into
Hmm.
why I now no longer automate it. And instead I manually edit everything. But basically you can put your credit cards and then you make categories for spending and it's very granular. So you are proactive, like the zero based method, where before the month starts, I categorize everything and I already allocate X amount of money in each category so that I know exactly where the money is going, like exactly where it's going. That $100 in my account, I know $20 is going this, $20 doing that, $20 doing this. And so I've
Right.
assigned a job and it's like the envelope method where you're assigning money to these categories. And if you want to spend more, or if you have to, or if you end up doing it just out of, your control, you realize you're using money from something else. So though I may have allocated
Right.
money for restaurants, but I had to spend more on, gifts because now it's like Thanksgiving or whatever. Maybe I'm taking money out of restaurants and putting money Thanksgiving. So
Right.
it gets
Right.
very granular. So just to kind of give an idea, like I have it open right now. Uh, I've got several different categories. So I have monthly fixed expenses. So, and this is just how
Hmm.
I categorize it. Everyone will be different.
Right.
So I got my rent, my utilities, which, vary a little bit, but it's basically the same. Internet,
Hmm.
my Apple Care, Apple iCloud, I pay for my family, Spotify, Peloton, right? Those are monthly, those are fixed. I got my monthly variable expenses, dining out, you know, like takeaway food. So, food to go,
Hmm.
gas, groceries, podcasts, we pay for this platform. I've got
Yeah. Right.
I
Right.
forgot a budget. Right. And then, et cetera. And then then I have like a savings short term, which is like activities financed by vacation. I have like an Invisalign, which I'm saving money up for to get Invisalign soon. And I got like
Okay.
Roth
So
IRA,
it's
right?
more
And
on
then
on the
so
savings
it's really
end now.
just, yeah, more on the savings side. But basically, I know where my money's going. Nothing is surprising me anymore. And I can actively track exactly where things are. And I think the cool part is that there's no surprises. So I have a category for I forgot to budget, but there's no kind of those infrequent payments like car insurance, disability insurance, all these things. It'll say like set aside $50 for this, every month
Mhm.
or whatever. Until I get to that point, I just take it out and I immediately just spend it and I'm good. I don't have to worry about where the money's coming from. So that's what I
Right.
use.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So, yeah. So I used Mint before, and I think I've probably told you that I
Yeah.
did. It just seemed like that they got a lot of the things wrong, and I have to actually go in there and like recategorize certain things. And
Yeah.
then I'm like, you know what? Forget it. I can write everything down, and
Yeah.
on Excel and just kind of keep track that way. So I use a combination of Excel and then multiple bank accounts. So both our salary comes to the joint checking account. We have a joint savings account that has,
Mhm.
emergency funds go to, right? And then also some of our just savings for, maybe travel or other things also go towards, right? So that goes into that joint
Mhm.
savings. And then each one of us have our own separate checkings account, all this under the same umbrella, like, Capital One account, right? Where, we send our discretionary money to, right? So this is sort of our allowance, how much money we can spend every month, right? So that comes to an account that's separate for me and it's separate for my wife, right? And then
Mm.
and then also at the same time, my brokerage account and my Roth IRA account are linked to the joint check-ins, and then that automatically is taken out. So if I get paid, let's say on the 1st of like March, for example, by the 2nd of March, everything that is necessary, including savings and retirements and all that kind of stuff, that gets taken out. And then what comes to really to me into my own checking account for how much money I can actually spend, and I can use it for anything I want, right? So I do a combination of the 50/30 method, but at the same time, also a component of pay yourself first, where like a lot of the necessary things like savings and investing money is just taken out of our bank account before I can even blink. And everything else that comes after that, I have that freedom knowing that I've already saved for a rainy day. And whatever it is I'm spending now is something that I'm actually allowed to spend, because I believe that, like, we should be saving, but at the same time, also we need to live life in the moment, because you never know when you're
Yeah,
going to
of
get hit by a
course.
bus and die. Yeah.
Clarify. So basically, you've got one account, like I guess where your direct deposit for your income is going to, then automatically on that day, just like let's just say like $2,000, and then it'll automatically put $1,500 into like a savings account, and give you each, you and Allison, like 250 each for spending. Basically, it's kind of
Right.
the gist, right?
Hmm.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
I guess I would say that's great. And I though I don't actually think about the 50/30/20, I know I'm doing that because I also have like my income's coming, then literally I have my income going, part of that going to my, to my investment account. Then also before I hit my income, just like you, I also put aside some money. At least for me, I put aside some money to like my 403b so I don't see it. But yeah, I also have another account. I have my savings account where all my savings, my short-term savings, long-term savings, I put it in there. But that for me is a little more manual because I find, and other people might find this too, can be a little difficult sometimes to know exactly how much I can do it. But regardless,
Right.
I think we'll both have our different ways, but it works for us, right?
Right. I would say that, being able to the 50/30 didn't just come overnight, right? We had to do other
Yeah.
ways to kind of figure out how much we're spending before we can say, okay, this is how much goes to our savings and this is what we can actually do, right? So that 20%, it was good to have the number 20%, but we're not necessarily married to it. Let's say something changed in our lives and we
Yeah.
have to kind of readjust to that. Then, what we
Mhm.
go is that we go and we edit that automatic transfer to our brokerage and Roth IRAs and stuff like that. We'll edit that and then make sure that is, changed to, let's say, 15, or if we can afford more, that we change to, let's say, 25% or so. So it's a guide, and less
Yeah.
so something that, we have to like be very stringent about. Yeah.
Mhm. So let me ask you, your spending, like I talked about how mine is like super granular. Like
Hmm.
like I track like exactly what spending, the what
Hmm.
category that money came out of. But it seems like you have this discretionary fund, and everything just going to come out of that categories, that kind of fund, so to speak. And it may not be as granular, which is totally fine. And it works for
Hmm.
you. But I just wanted to clarify that.
So on the Excel sheet, I have a more granular like breakdown of
Okay.
everything. So the only thing that needs to be taken out is, so we take out what is going towards our brokerage investment, right? And our Roth IRA. And
Mhm.
so that goes to an external account where we do our investments, right? And then the savings, what we have towards our emergency fund, also goes out from the direct deposit account, right? To that savings account, right? And
Right.
then our discretionary stuff just comes to our each separate checking account, right? And then
Gotcha.
everything else, like groceries, mortgage, our utilities,
Mhm.
internet and Spotify, student loans, dog food, gas, auto insurance, phone bill, and auto loan and all that kind of stuff. That comes out of that, joint checking account where our direct deposit came to. So that money that we know that is accounted for. So it's not like, just sitting there willy-nilly. It's accounted for,
Right.
but we do have a whole breakdown
Within
of
that.
each one.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
and it seems to work because now it's more, almost like automatic. I don't even think about it, right?
You don't think about it.
Because I
Mhm.
know, right? Because I know that the debit card that I have is has exactly how much I can spend, and then once I spend that money, I can't use that debit card anymore. So
Yeah,
that's one way to approach.
that makes sense. I guess, yeah, if you use a debit card and it has a much, that makes sense. You just can't spend it and it's over. Yeah.
Right, right, right. So the next question. So what kind of student loans do you have, and are you making any payments currently?
Yeah. I have one private loan and then public loan.
Hmm.
And,
Okay.
long story why I ended up taking this private loan. And, again, I just wasn't so informed back in the day, but it's not a terrible loan. It's not a bad loan. My school offered it as a subsidized loan, and
Hmm.
accumulation interest doesn't start until 4 years after you graduate. And if I pay it
Okay.
off before, then I don't have, then I don't have any more balance. But I do have those two loans. The public loan would, the whole COVID changes, which, no one could predict. You could make a
Hmm.
zero payment and that'll count as a payment that might end later
Hmm.
this year as what it looks
Hmm.
like.
Hmm.
But I do have those loans, and I am
Hmm.
actively paying off my private loan because I have to, because that's,
Hmm.
there's no zero payment for that. But but it's not terrible. I think the whole loan topic is like its own episode in and of itself, with
Right.
pros and cons. I think when initially, I didn't know what field I was going into. I had no idea about
Hmm.
really anything.
Hmm.
And but yeah, I do have to kind of actively kind of budget away for that.
Right. Yeah. So I do have private and federal loans, right? When I started college, I was actually still an international student. So the only type of student loans that are available to me were all private student loans. I've refinanced it because there were better rates from when I initially got it. So I refinanced it with
Okay.
SoFi when like interest were like that cheap. And so now I have a
Mhm.
very good rate on it. They realize that you're a medical student or you're a resident, so you don't make as much money. So they cap your payments while you're in training to a certain amount. So I think I pay something like
Mhm.
$100 every month for that. And then the federal loans, like you mentioned, during COVID, they put a moratorium on it where we don't make any actual payments on it. And that actually kind of gave a little flexibility
Yeah.
during the pandemic to be able to shift that towards like, investing a little bit more or saving a little bit more money on the
Mhm.
side. So that was a good thing, at least for me. And so, that having a sense of that of what kind of loans that you have and the interest on them. The reason why I ask is because the interest on them vary depending on when you got them and also what agency holds them in terms of federal loans versus like private loans. And then there's also certain protections that you get with, federal loans versus a private loan. An example being the fact that, for federal loans during a financial difficulty during COVID, they stopped payments and private loans didn't do that. But
Incredible,
that's something that
honestly, incredible.
we- right. So now we can talk about investing. So we mentioned how we break down our budget How much are you saving in your bank account and how much are you actually investing?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, the way I kind of look at it is I want to maximize some form of retirement
Mhm.
account. So I put in 500 a month. I guess now I have to do more because the max Roth IRA contribution is now 6,500 for the year instead of
Right,
6,000. So
right.
I'll have to increase that a little bit, but I want to fill that out. And, I think we make, and just for transparency's sake, and you can find this online, I think our salary this year is like $73,000
Mhm,
and pre-tax, right? So
mhm.
out of our gross salary, I mean, that itself is what, like 9% or so
Mm.
in total. And then I do put money in my my 403b, and they offer a Roth 403b. So that is
Right.
after tax income that they'll take away
Mhm,
from my paycheck. And
mhm.
I know you and I have talked about that, but I think those are my main investments. And one of the reasons I wanted to use my Roth 403b is, though they're not matching, unfortunately,
Yeah, yeah.
if I see it in my account, I think of it as this like flexibility type spend. And I
Mhm,
don't want to do, and I want to force myself to say, but I'm just not disciplined enough currently to make that change. So I prefer, though potentially my return long term will be less than maybe if I manage on my own, I just don't want to see it right now.
mhm.
And so I try to max that as much as I can. So I'm not maxing my fours or B by any means. That would
Yeah,
require a
it's like
substantial amount of money where,
20 something
yeah,
thousand.
right. And if you do like a post tax, that's like, what, 30,000, something like that, that
Mhm,
you'd actually from your income. So I'm obviously not maxing that amount out, but I haven't done a calculation, but I basically have increased that to the best of my ability. So my
mhm.
other savings, in terms of just kind of short term savings, or rather long term savings like house down payment and things, it's less than other people because I made the decision once I become an attendant, because I'm just not looking for a house right now. And I anticipate renting maybe for my first year in the future. I will really start to save for that kind of down payment later on. So I
Mhm.
kind of focus on my retirement account. Then I do have a little bit of money in my taxable account. Really not much right now, but that's just kind of for fun investing. Hopefully I will, make some good moves. Historically,
Mhm.
it's been questionable, but that's why I
Mhm.
kind of max my retirement accounts first. And then I have my kind of short-term spend savings, like, my insurance payments coming through, things like that. But I
Right,
try to do
right.
most of my savings to my retirement account.
Okay, okay. Yeah, so I think for us, it's probably right now somewhere around 40, 60. 40%
Mhm.
of that is just, building an emergency fund in our main savings account. You know, like you said, we have a 403 at our institution. It's a retirement account, but it's not much. So a little bit of the money, about $100 a month, goes to that account. And then the rest of it, I try to really like max out, my wife and I, our Roth IRA, because,
Mhm.
a Roth IRA is a tax advantage account, right? Meaning that, we're paying the taxes now. And then potentially when I'm an attendant where my tax rate has gone up, any gains that I make on that money won't be taxed again. Maybe we should do a recap of like what the different accounts are. So there is, in terms of investment vehicles, right? The big ones is that you have your retirement accounts, and then you have a regular old brokerage, which is usually not tax advantage accounts, right? And the retirement accounts, right? You can get a retirement account through your workplace. And then as an individual outside of your workplace, you can also have other type of retirement account. In your workplace, there's several different types of accounts. Some of you have had a 401k, 403b. You can approach contributing to those accounts, either paying the taxes already before you put that money into the account, or you wait till after you take out that investment to pay the taxes off. So if you're doing a Roth 403b or Roth 401k, for
Mhm.
example, it means that you already contributing to that retirement account after you paid your taxes on that money. And that means that at a later time, when that money grows, potentially, let's say 20 years down the line, when you take the whole money, your principal that you put in, and then the gains on it, you're not going to be taxed again. So that's the advantage
Yeah.
of that. There is the regular, you know, you know, 403b or 401k where you do not pay the taxes now. So you can actually deduct that contribution from your taxes where you don't pay your taxes now. So you just contribute to that account. And then when, say, 20 years down the line, and when you take that money out, then you pay the taxes. So you have to figure out whether in the future you're going to be in a bigger tax bracket or whether you're going to be in a lower tax bracket to decide which one is good for you. So those are the workplace related type of retirement accounts. As an individual outside of your workplace, you can have an IRA, and an IRA stands for individual retirement account. And if you make any income, if you make any income, you can contribute, I think, if you're less than 50 years, 6,500 annually. And if you're more than 50 years or so, they increase that a little bit to, I think it's 7,000 or 7,500. Again, you can do that as a Roth, or you can just do that as a regular IRA where you're not paying the taxes until later on. So what we're saying is that right now we're doing our Roth IRA first, which is the
Mhm.
6,500. And then we're putting a little bit of a Roth 403b,
Yeah.
well, if you can afford it. Now, if say your workplace matches your contributions to your 403b, then you probably want to flip it around where you're contributing first to your workplace 403b or 401k, because it means that if I put $6,000 in that account, then my workplace is going to put another 6,000 to it. So
Yeah.
automatically
Free
you're
money.
doubling that contribution. So that's why some people sometimes would say you should contribute to your 401k or your 403b first. But in our case, where we're residents, we don't get a match because we're not really members of the staff in the hospital. So for some reason, so we don't get that much. I think there are some places where they get a match, but we don't. So in that case, I just opt to kind of put that money in the Roth IRA, and just like NHG, you also do the same. So that was just a
Mhm.
little
Mhm.
recap, because sometimes I know these vehicles can be very confusing. If you're confused, still confused, just Google different types of retirement accounts and investment, and there's very good articles out there that can help. Now we can talk about adapting your budget. So has there been situation where, like, the budget that you have right now, you have to like scrap it, or you have to like make big changes to it so that you can you can afford something, or you can do something that needs to be done?
Definitely. I mean, I think we all kind of have that, right? Things life happens, and you end up needing to adapt. I would say in terms of like my regular income, that's been very stable. You can find it. They have a little bit of a raise every year, but I think there's a few things. One, there was not a change in financial situation. I didn't count on expected expenses that were infrequent, like my disability insurance. It's like $1,400 once a year. You can do it monthly, but you end up paying the total comes out more. I have a few different payment plans. And if I had done
Mhm.
that, I would have remembered, but I was like, no, I want to save money, which is a smart decision. But then I just like didn't
Mhm.
realize all of a sudden I had $1,400 taken out of my bank account.
Right.
And I needed unfortunately to tap into my emergency fund for that.
Right.
Another like car insurance is like twice a month, right? So even though those are expected, if you're not expecting it, they can actually be pretty big. especially when
Mhm.
kind of income that, we have.
Mhm.
I thankfully have not like lost my job, but I have had car issues happen. So for
Mhm.
example, my power steering stopped working and I found myself like on the road. I was making a turn. Luckily, there was like at night and there was like no one there, but it could have been pretty dangerous. And though my
Uh-huh.
warranty did cover part of it, it didn't cover everything. So I had to pay that. Luckily, I didn't have enough money that I wanted to pay for it. So I did have to make changes, but I was able to kind of make that change. I will say
Mhm.
there was, I think personal life changes happen too. For example, I went through a breakup and, after that, honestly, my budgeting really declined drastically and I wasn't really paying
Right.
attention,
Mhm.
so I ended up doing like buyer's therapy where I just kind of spent money on kind of frivolous items that some will
Right.
regret
Right.
purchasing. And, luckily the habits of forming a budget and saving, I still had them.
Mhm.
So I didn't spend all the money I had. I did save
Mm.
some, but I did end up
Mhm.
buying like, brand name clothes that I just like will never wear.
Right. Right. Right.
But like it's
Right.
just expensive items that are just like way too much. And I think what happens when kind of personal changes happen, it just kind of takes a hit. It kind of falls prey.
Mhm.
And then, at least for me, what ended up happening was I kind of got in a better mental state again. I read Psychology of Money, which really kind of put that kind of stuff in high gear again. And then I kind of retooled my budget. I stopped using you need a budget for a while and it just kind of went to free fall mode. So then I restarted
Right.
and it's now kind of back on track. And also things change, like I started dating again and man, dating is a huge expense, man. Like, so I'm like, so my like monthly expenses were very different than it was. And then I was like, man, I gotta
Uh-huh.
allocate money for restaurants, diet,
Right. Right.
activities, and all this
Right.
stuff that I just like wasn't doing. So,
Right.
so things do change and you do have to adapt. And it's tough. It's tough to adapt. And I kind of had to make some serious like cuts, like I wasn't
Mhm.
putting in as much money in my vacation fund. And I like to go on like a trip and things like that. And I kind of had to allocate all that to dating.
Mhm.
But
Right.
so
Right.
things do have
Yeah. So definitely your budget in life is just more eventful than mine. I think that has to do more to do with the fact that you're a single gentleman, I know, and you're dating, and you have, other things that are happening. I'm glad you're doing
it's
better
more
now.
it's more stable now. Now I'm back in a relationship. So I'm like, oh wow, I
Right.
could budget more regularly and anticipate more.
Right. 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 But similar to you, there's been times where, I have to, make changes to our budget because of cash flow, not because of something that we can afford. So sometimes we have expected expenses, like you mentioned, but it's really a cash flow thing where like it gets taken out every 6 months or every year.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to kind of like make sure that you have a handle on it so that you're not caught by surprise when that happens. So in those instances, I have to like shift things around to make up for that
Mhm.
big chunk of expense, like paying or like car insurance or like even paying off my property taxes, for example. Sometimes can cost that big chunk of money being taken out of our account. There's definitely a time where I've had emergency, like a car emergency or something like that, where, I've had to now, right.
You've
I
had quite
had
a
to now,
you do a couple of those emergencies.
right, right. But, that's why it's important to kind of have a sort of like an emergency fund because the emergency fund have come in clutch when you need them, right? But in the past, when I didn't have an emergency fund, that means that I have to now figure out, how much I can actually spend on my groceries, how much I can actually spend on things that I,
Mhm.
I, I wouldn't necessarily classify as necessities, right? But yeah, so that's why it pays to really have an emergency fund as well. So how often do you come back and say, yeah, I want to review my budget, like, because like everything is going so well. And I'll say personally, I probably do that maybe once a year. If I know my salary is going to change, it kind of shift things around. But how often do you do
Mhm.
that?
I, I think before I was doing it like once a month and then things fell apart and now I'm kind of doing it again. I would say, and I think it's because of how I budget, like using something like YNAB where it's really just like very granular. Though I've set kind of my monthly spend categories and whatnot already, and that's been pretty stable. I end up
Mm-hmm.
using, because I'm just using that software and tracking everything, I do pretty frequently. So I kind of set
Mm-hmm.
aside time once a week to go back, to go into all my credit card statements. I pull it together and just kind of put everything in so that I
Mm-hmm.
my, know my expenses. But then once a week got a little burdensome. So now I'm doing it once in 2 weeks,
Right.
but it's fine.
Okay.
Cause I think, it'll just naturally for me. Like I already know I need to do that. And then I'll get to it at some point and
Mm-hmm.
I'll do it. I don't think I'm changing my overall budget necessarily, but I do think there are some things change. Like, I want to buy a couple of gifts for people later. And so I do try and make changes now so that I don't have to make big changes later. But, I think that's just what happening when you're on a little bit of a tight budget. If I was a little more loose, maybe
Mm-hmm.
I put less money in my Roth 403b, I wouldn't have as much
Mm-hmm.
of like a problem. But
Right.
because really try to kind of go on the edge, I end up needing to check and a little bit
Right.
more
Right.
frequent.
Mm-hmm. 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 So now we probably transition to what our long-term budgeting plans are and what our goals are. Obviously we're PGY 4, right? We'll be PGY 5 in a little bit, and we'll be transitioning to attending hood, right? So what are specific goals of budgeting do you see for yourself as you transition from residency to being an attendant? Is there anything that like you know you're looking forward to, or anything things that you feel like you have to kind of get on top of to be able to to survive being an attendant?
Yeah, I think one thing I'm looking forward to is not having, again, like this razor thin margin where like every cent is like so important. So I think just that like comfort, flexibility. I do
Hmm.
plan on quote unquote living like a resident, definitely upping my
Okay.
lifestyle a little bit, but
Hmm.
not where it's like, unreasonable.
Right.
I think, my big things are I do want to save money and I do have to actively do a pretty large amount for perhaps like a house down payment in the future,
Hmm.
perhaps like now, setting aside money for wedding stuff if, things are going well. So probably something I'll have to do. So something like that. And I think just having, I don't have I don't have so many things I want to spend on, but just having some money to travel when I do travel. I think right now it's always like I can only spend like X amounts, maybe having a little more
Right.
flexibility
Right.
on that
Hmm.
vacation budget would be nice. So I think really
Hmm.
those are the things. Yeah. How about
Gotcha.
you?
Yeah, a goal that I have for myself is that I want to pay off my at least my private student loans off within 3 to 4 years after I finish, residency. And then depending on whether I get a job, a nonprofit job, or like working for a hospital, like especially if it's academics and stuff, that,
Yeah.
if maybe I could continue to do the PSLF, right? And get the rest of it forgiven after, 5 years as an attendant, because I would have had 5 years as a resident
The
where I did
resident.
PSLF, right? Yeah. So depending on what that looks like, I'm hoping that my student loans will be gone in 5 years after I become an attendant. So that means that I
Mhm.
have to really, make sure that I'm budgeting appropriately for that. Some of the things that right now my wife and I are not able to really budget so much for is like travel. We like to travel, and right now, it's not really in the budget to really have a reasonable travel budget for ourselves. So that would be
Yeah.
something nice to be able to budget for. And, family members and my parents that I want to support a little bit better than I am able to, family that I have in Ghana that I want to be able to support that I
Mhm.
can't really do that right now. So those are some aspirations when it comes to money in terms of what's ahead of me. And
Yeah, I guess I forgot about that. Yeah, I wanna support my parents as well, and at some point, I want to start a family. So I really need to put money aside because I don't have any
right,
money for that right
right. Dude, believe it or not, I put away $100 for a potential kid every month.
$100, that's
Right.
good. I mean, like, that's
Yeah.
you're at least doing something. You
Right.
can buy that
Right.
crib for sure, car seat, things
Yeah,
like
their
that,
car seat. Yeah. 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 $100 a month or 1,200 a year. That 1,200 a year alone is going to be like 1 month of like daycare or whatever is what I'm told. Yeah.
But at least you could pay the first month, right? You don't have to wait for
Like
for
the
it to
first
10
one. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in terms of about financial independence, we had a little bit of that
Mhm.
conversation with AC in the
Yeah.
previous episode. Where do you think your budgeting comes in relation to why you want to retire?
Yeah, I probably should have mentioned this also by long-term aspiration. Like we talked about in AC, the FIRE movement, financial independence, retire early. I don't really want to retire per se, but I want flexibility. I want to be able to operate in some capacity, have some more autonomy, maybe some more of my own schedule. My girlfriend works remotely and there are some cons to that for sure, like lack of kind of social connection with people. But
Mhm,
there are some serious pros and being able to have at least some days where I can, be at home if I have a family, kind of spend time with that, be able to
mhm,
do that and kind of all that. And also I have interests outside of being a clinician that I want to pursue and I want to be able to take that financial risk and that kind
mhm,
of lower income to do just for my own happiness. And
mhm,
my kind of age, I want to stop being a clinician is 50. And that means that I really have to have a high savings rate, especially when
mhm,
accounting for potential
mhm.
kids in my life. And I know I might have to take, sacrifices. I can't go to like a Broadway show, often. I like Broadway show, like concerts. I enjoy concerts,
Right,
and
right,
that maybe
right.
I can't go to like expensive ones. But regardless,
Mhm,
I I think 50 for me is really my goal. I'm 31 now. I'll be attending at 32.
mhm.
Ideally it's like 45, but I think that's like kind of stretching it because I do have to pay off my loans and other
Right.
stuff. So, but I think 50 is a goal with the understanding that, I might have to be flexible on that, but that really is like my goal. If
Mhm.
I'm a full-time clinician at 50, I did something wrong is like how I'm looking at it as.
Okay,
Part-time is fine,
okay.
but part-time's fine,
Mhm.
but full-time,
Right,
full-time.
right, right. Yeah, I think that yes, it will be great to have some kind of independence in terms of when you want to work and all that kind of stuff. Like I mentioned, like I do have family in Ghana, and at some point I see being able to travel back and forth. And I think maybe like in my head, I have a soft goal of like 55, where I can
Yeah,
like maybe work in some capacity, not as much as I would be if I'm an attendant at 32, right? That I
yeah.
don't necessarily see myself wanting to work myself to the ground. So I'm like 65 or whatever. There's no way I want to convince myself of that. So, but saying that is easy, but it means that you have to really plan properly, right? And be
Mhm.
able to afford some form of lifestyle, you know, at that point when you want to have that kind of independence, right? That would mean that you have to really train yourself not to have a certain type of lifestyle. Because if you have a lifestyle creep, and let's say on average, you're living on 200K a year, it means that when you retire, you're more likely going to live on 200K. So you have to be able to afford
Mhm.
that versus say, if you live on less than, let's say, 80K a year or like, 90K a year or 100K a year, right? Your retirement and how much you can stretch out your finances will look different. So, this is things that I think about, and I don't have any definite plans because it's 20 years from now. But in
Yeah.
terms of like what I want to do, I definitely want to be able to have that ability to decide when I can get up and go somewhere. Yeah. So this seemed like a very good point to wrap up our conversation. We talked about the different types of budgeting that are out there. We discussed what our approach is to budgeting and some of the goals that we have and really adapting our budget to different phases in life, like emergencies. So if you have any questions about budgeting, like, we, in our show notes from last time, we put AC's YouTube channel, and also you can comment on our YouTube channel or reach out to us. We'll leave our email in the show note as well. So you can reach out to us if you have any questions about, some of the things that we did on our way from, let's say, medical school to residency. At some point, we can also talk about whether it's, a good idea to rent versus when to actually buy your home. I made a decision to buy my home, but at the time it made sense. So that's probably like a whole podcast conversation that we can have at some point, right?
Yeah, definitely. I just want to stress to people listening, it takes time to really formulate a
Mhm.
budget, what works for you, how many bank accounts you want, how to allocate it. It'll take some months to do. So don't get stressed if it takes a while. And
Mhm.
you'll learn that you'll have to adapt as things change. And I would actually encourage, we talked before about automating certain things that coming out of your bank account. I encourage you to do that. And I actually
Mhm.
think for me, I think one thing you can think about is just manually going through all your accounts and putting it in whatever spreadsheet or platform you use. Cause I think just doing it manually makes you really understand how much money you have, where it's going, instead of just relying on a third party service. Yeah, I think we had a really good discussion about budgeting, and I'd encourage everyone to at least start thinking about things now and seeing what to do.
So before you go, any TV show or book that you're reading that you care to share with us?
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, I finished reading Psychology of Money, and honestly, I'd encourage everyone to read it. I think the book is great. It really just talks about saving, budgeting, but really the mindset of what to do, not necessarily how to do, but the mindset and kind of getting into
Mhm.
that practice to build that habit. It's a really great book. It's a short read. It did take me a little while, but it's actually a short read. I do think it'll be useful for everyone. So check it out.
Yeah, yeah, that's cool. Is it James Clear, right? It's a very popular book.
No, that's
Is it?
so
Oh,
James
that's
Clear,
Morgan
it's,
House. Morgan
Morgan
Housel.
Housel. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah, yeah.
I'm also reading Atomic Habits, but I didn't mention
Atomic Habits.
that.
Yeah, that's James Clear. Okay. Yeah, no, I'm not reading a book currently, but I would say the new season of Mandalorian came out, so that's what I've been watching.
Oh, I
So
forgot about
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. This It's only like 2 episodes out, but it was nice to have it come back because I was running out of TV shows to watch. So listeners, thank you for joining us this week. We'll see you guys next time, and bye.
See ya.